Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Cutting Through the Bullshit. I am your host, Dr. Stephanie Snyder, and I am a high performance mentor. Through my unique blend of strategy, mindset, and intuition, I help men and women to cut through the BS in order to create the life and business they desire. So, I went on a run this morning, So, last week I did something to my sciatic nerve and really was on limited movement in terms of my workouts. I did some yoga, but today I was just feeling a little bit restless, and so I went out for a run and had some incredible downloads while I was running, as I usually do. Really just a great space for all of those things. So on my run this morning, I had the idea of let's talk about relationships here because I started to write about this I started to write about it this morning. I didn't share it to any social media, but I said, you know what, that actually warrants a whole podcast discussion. This is not something that can be clean and neat in simple text, right? So we're going to talk about how the problem isn't actually communication, it is comprehension. So this past weekend, my youngest daughters, but the two younger daughters, had soccer tournaments in Richmond and Fredericksburg. And so it was a divide and conquer kind of a weekend. My husband was with the 11-year-old and I was with the 8-year-old. And we happened to be not so far where my 8-year-old was. We weren't too far from where one of my friends from grad school lives. And so he happened to have his kids for the weekend. His youngest daughter is 8. And so I said, perfect, we'll come over, we'll hang out, right? And it was so nice to just hang out. I haven't seen him quite a bit in years. And so we're discussing life, right? And he's unfortunately going through kind of a nasty divorce. And so he's asking me these questions from a woman's perspective. And I am just very honest with people when I talk about things. And so I'm giving him very honest responses. And he's like, really? That's how your brain works? Like, why does your brain work that way? Like, I have no idea, right? But I know that when I came home, it was how do I explain it? There was a little bit of agitation when I came home because it was so nice to have a conversation and not have the TV on. And I feel like the TV is on in my house a lot. Or the conversation consists of, okay, where are the kids going? What are we doing? All of these things, right? And so I felt myself getting a little bit short with my husband. And I'm not usually the one to just quickly blame it on somebody else. I'm like, all right, what's actually going on? Why am I feeling this way? Let's coach myself through it before I start to point blame. And what I realized was I was waiting for someone to ask me how my day was, right? Like, there's a whole lot of logistics that my husband and I discuss that there is not necessarily a whole lot of, what are you dreaming about? Where do you want to do this? What is the vision? What are we working towards? How do you feel? How was your day, right? There aren't necessarily a lot of those conversations because we're strategizing and doing logistics almost constantly with 4 kids and soccer and golf and school schedules and soccer schedules and our own work schedules and our businesses. And so there's a lot of logistical conversation, and I was craving more of the connective conversation. And so once I realized what my frustration was, I actually had that conversation with myself first, because I know that more often than not, the thing that I'm annoyed about it outside of myself because I haven't yet given it to myself. And so I sat down and I gave myself that depth in that conversation this morning and in a journal session. And then I walked out and I looked at my husband and I said, listen, when I am like angry and annoyed, it doesn't help for you to ask me if I'm angry or annoyed. That helps nobody. What helps me is like giving me a hug or asking me how I'm feeling or like anything to check in and recognize that your wife is actually a person and not this robo woman who just bulldozes through everything, right? And so it was a really interesting conversation in terms of that, because I think what happens sometimes is we have this conversation with somebody, and then we see in our own relationship where that conversation isn't showing up, and we start to see all the lack in whatever the relationship is, right? And so maybe this is something on Facebook where you see that somebody had these clients and that client and this sale and that sale, and they have this big beautiful life on social media, and then you look at your life and you're like, blah, 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 like right? You're like, it's, the wah, wah, wah. It doesn't feel so glamorous when you look at your life that way, because you start to compare it. And that comparison can really steal your joy, really steal your joy. And so I've gotten to a place now where I can recognize it coming up and bring it back into myself and say, okay, where is this coming up? Because I do believe that the world is my mirror. It can be my oyster, but it's usually my mirror first. And whatever I'm annoyed about is something that I actually have the control over, right? Because it's not that I have control over this situation, but I have control over my emotion of being annoyed. So I get to look at that and say, okay, here's what I'm annoyed about. But was I actually bulldozing myself first and then blamed it on my husband? Well, yeah, absolutely, right? Like I was just power moving through things. And so I sat down and I gave myself the space and had that in-depth conversation with myself. And then I was no longer annoyed with my husband for not having that conversation with me or conversations with me. And this is why it's so important to do the work on ourselves, because we are the only ones who can change ourselves and thus change the world. Because when you change what you look at changes. And so as you start to do the work on yourself, you're going to start to see things differently. You'll start to see the world differently. And so it isn't that you need a fix. There's nothing wrong with you. It's a perspective shift that's necessary if things don't seem to be going your way, quote unquote, right? Like if life feels like you're stuck, it's not necessarily a fix outside of yourself. It's a perspective shift that can really help to do that change. But we're not going to dive into those perspective shifts today, although this is a perspective shift in and of itself. I really want to talk about this idea of comprehension, because it is true, we can communicate. And quite frankly, I think sometimes we're over communicators. We try to over explain, we try to make sure that it makes sense, and sometimes we use too many words, right? We can be very verbose about things. And the truth is, a lot of the times the thing is small enough that we don't need to be so verbose about it. And so it becomes a matter of comprehension. And so when it comes to comprehension, it's making sure it lands with the other person. And more often than not, the comprehension issue is between men and women, because we think very, very differently. And we communicate very differently, not just think very differently, but we communicate very differently. In that, when I communicate, it is oftentimes my communication of feelings. This is what I'm feeling. Whereas my husband communicates with, this is what I'm thinking. And those are two very different types of communication, because I can talk about what I think about, and my husband can talk about what he feels about, but that's not typically the first place that we go. Most of the time, we don't typically go to both thinking. Here's what I'm thinking. Oftentimes we go to he's thinking and I'm feeling, and then that's where the water gets real murky. And so it's not so much that I have to change the way that I communicate. It's that we both have to pay attention to how the other is communicating. because I communicate a lot with feelings. He communicates a lot with thinking. And yes, I can get to the thinking side of things, but I don't always want to get to the thinking side of things, right? Part of that conversation, part of, what I was just talking about before was the whole idea, like, I didn't want to have a logistical thinking conversation. I wanted a feeling conversation. And to be fair, he really wasn't in the right frame of mind. I kind of bombarded him with it last night, and then I got annoyed when he didn't want to have a feeling conversation, right? And so part of that was my side of things, but also part of it was his side of things, right? And so it really does come to is your partner really understanding what it is that you're saying? Are you being clear enough in your language that it's coming through? Or are you just hoping that the other person can read between the lines? Because that happens a lot, right? Well, he should just know. Why should he know? Have you told him? Does he really know? And the example that I like to use for this is, let's say, the beginning of your relationship. He makes you breakfast in bed. And he makes you eggs. And he makes you scrambled eggs. And you hate scrambled eggs. Like, really hate scrambled eggs. Like, you can't get over the texture of scrambled eggs. Okay? So, this is early in your relationship. And you eat this breakfast, and you're so grateful for the breakfast, and you tell him that you love the eggs. You have now set yourself up for a life of scrambled eggs that you hate. Full disclosure. Okay? Now, you don't have to be mean about it and be like, I hate scrambled eggs. You can say, oh my gosh, that was so sweet of you. This is just the sweetest. I'm so grateful for this. I'm not really a fan of scrambled eggs, though. I like sunny side up or medium or over medium, like whatever it is, right? You can be grateful for it and still tell your partner what it is that they really like, that you really like. The problem is our people-pleasing self as women show up and we think that it's mean to tell someone what we really want. But all it does is set you up for disappointment forever down the road. Because to him, he's gotten a gold star for this breakfast and made you scrambled eggs, and he thinks that scrambled eggs are your favorite now. And so you can either have that hard conversation, quote unquote hard, I use this very loosely. You can either have that hard conversation at the beginning of your relationship, or you can get pissed and resentful for the fact that you've eaten scrambled eggs for the last 20 years. And maybe that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? And it is okay if your taste changes, right? I told my husband for Valentine's Day this year, I was very clear to him that this was going to be the last Valentine's Day that he was going to get a free pass. You can get me plants on this Valentine's Day. I said, but next year I want jewelry. And he was like, what? Why? I said, because I want jewelry. I like wearing jewelry, and I want you to get me jewelry for Valentine's Day next year. Will I have to remind him? Yeah, probably. But I'd rather be very clear with him than be vague and be disappointed because I was vague. His brain works very differently than mine. Very differently than mine. Mine is constantly going. It never stops, never really turns off. Even when I'm sleeping, the dreams are still very vivid. He actually has a nothing box that he can go in and hang out and legitimately think about nothing. And sometimes I'm envious of that. But knowing that means that I have to communicate or make an effort, at least, to communicate in a way in which he gets it. Now, do I always have to be the one who communicates appropriately? No. It's a give and take. It's a back and forth. It's a dance. Sometimes I'm leading, sometimes I'm following. But there's a willingness there because we made a decision almost 20 years ago to marry each other for better or for worse, for sicker or for poorer, right? For health or sickness. Yeah. Richer or poorer, right? The whole thing. And a lot of people just kind of toss it to the side when they don't seem to get through to their partner. And yeah, it's frustrating. Yeah, we change and we grow. And yes, sometimes being separate is probably better for both of you. But sometimes it's a lack of comprehension. It's a people-pleasing that has snowballed. And I'm not saying that we have to take all of the ownership for this as women. Okay, that's not what I'm suggesting at all. But there are things that we can do that do make a difference. I'm living proof of that. Military spouse, survived 20 years, and we're still here. That is not the statistical norm in the military at all. We have, of the friends that we were with in Sicily, I think there's only one couple left that's still married, 2 couples left, of like the 8 to 10 couples that we hung out with regularly. I think there's 2 that are still together besides us. So it's a pretty big divorce rate, specifically in the military. And it takes work, it takes effort on both parts. And so one really quick exercise that I'll give you that works out pretty well for my husband and I don't remember where I learned this, and I would love to give the credit, but I will never remember where I learned it. It's been years. And it is, here's what you said, but here's what I heard. Because when we are talking to our partner, we also get their body language, their tone, their inflection, their energy, their attitude, right? Like everything comes with it. It's not just the words coming out of their mouth, it's every other thing that's happening as well. And so when he says something and I feel myself immediately start to get agitated and my blood boils, I will slow down and I'll say, okay, here's what you said, but here's what I heard. And that gives him the opportunity to, quote, course correct in the moment, right? Without me flying off my rocker. Now, sometimes I do just get real steamy and I walk away. And then I come back once I've had my little temper tantrum. Okay. But having that conversation allows him to see how it's actually coming off, as opposed to me just flying off my rocker and screaming at him, because then he gets on the defense and then we get nowhere. And that doesn't solve anything. So here's what you said, but here's what I heard. It's a very powerful exercise. I remember I said it to my niece one time, and she and her boyfriend laughed about it, and they kind of poked fun at it. And then a little later into their relationship, they realized the power of it. And so it is really beneficial to have those conversations. And you can do it without being defensive and guarded and all the things. You can actually have these conversations and they will get somewhere. So that is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If this is your first time catching me, thank you so much for being here. I would love if you would like or subscribe to this podcast or YouTube channel, however you're finding me. And if it gave you any value, if you want to share it on social media, I would be so honored. Also, if you are interested in cutting through the BS with me, working with me privately, I do have spots available. So you can reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram at Stephanie Snyder, Ph.D., or to my website, stephaniesnyderphd.com, and we'll have a conversation. I'll see how we can connect and shift some things, and we'll go from there. So I'm sending you so much love. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. And as always, be you, because the world needs more of you. Bye.